Well, welcome back to Face to Face. My name is David Peck, and you are listening here online, or maybe you're watching online, or maybe just listening in the car as you're driving to work or hanging out at the gym, and that's okay too. But whatever you do, please subscribe and share this with family and friends. It's one of our biggest requests. Share it with everyone. I mean, just share it with, even if they're not your friends, share it with everyone you know. We've got a really amazing conversation, I think, coming up here with Matt Whitaker and Rupert Evans, talking about a new film called Truth and Treason. And they're here today with us on Face to Face, and I'm absolutely thrilled about that. Matt, Rupert, thank you for hanging out with me here today.
Thank you, David.
David, thanks for having us on Face to Face. It's great to see you.
It is good to see the two of you as well. And I just want to do another shout out and say how grateful I am when technology works. Isn't it a wonderful thing? There's this great film. It just hit me. David Cronenberg, who I got to interview a little while ago about his new film, The Shrouds. And it was just a real honor to be able to chat with him. He was in a film called Blood and Donuts. I'm going to say maybe 20 years ago or something like that. Or it might have been Last Night, actually, by Don McKellar. And he's on the cell phone. The world's coming to an end, and his cell phone doesn't work. And he throws it aside. And maybe one of these days they're going to get this figured out. And he throws the one time you want your cell phone to work is on the last night of the world, Anyway, it's a thrill. It's a pleasure to see you both. Rupert, a big fan, huge fan to Man in the High Castle. I mean, come on. I mean, just such a great series, and what a great storyline, and kind of in a way very similar to what we're talking about here today with Truth and Treason. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right, David. It's certainly, Philip K. Dick certainly, I think, had an interest in the Third Reich and the rise of Nazism, and obviously Truth and Treason is all sort of set in that time. So there are certain parallels. And for me, it was really interesting because in Man in the High Castle, I was actually playing someone who was very much at the bottom of the pile in terms of, I wasn't, I was just a sort of an American in that show. And if for those who have never seen Man in the High Castle, it's an alternative history piece on Amazon. It's worth a watch. It's kind of what if Hitler won World War II and sort of took over America and occupied America. I didn't play a Nazi in that, but I do in this. So for me, it was a really interesting turn. I had done a huge amount of research during Man in the High Castle about the Third Reich, and I read a lot of books. So weirdly, that helped me moving into this movie, Truth and Treason. And that was, it sort of, I felt like I had a great sort of grounding of knowledge, but I certainly read other books, and particularly about the Gestapo. I read a number of books on that, and so that helped too. But yes, certainly life is funny how how things come around in circles, and that's certainly true for me. And with this movie, Truth and Treason,
I'm not one.
Maybe we should do a rom-com next.
Yeah.
Something like.
I fully support that, Matt. I fully support that.
But set in Nazi Germany, okay? A rom-com, but not, I don't know.
Interesting. Yes, I want to see the script on that, or at least the first 10 pages. That's hilarious. Well, I love, Rupert, that you already sort of called out that sort of, I'm going to say, that dualistic like sort of notion of because you if I can say this in Man in the High Castle, you're kind of the resistance, and yet in this case you're not completely. I want to talk about that a little later, by the way, but you are sort of on the other side, if we can be so simplistic about good and bad, and I don't think we can. Matt, I'd love to hear about that from you. I mean, holy cow, Truth and Treason, polar opposites, paradox, contradiction. This is what life, evil. What do you do? Do you resist? Do you push back? I mean, all of this comes out in the film. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of this film. Beautiful story, so well told. And it's almost a little alarming to me that it was so easy to watch, for such a difficult story about being defiant in the face of this incredible oppressive power, bearing down on families and churches and schools and a country. And anyway, I'd love to hear a little bit of your, I don't know, what got you here?
Yeah. It's interesting because you talked about the appreciating the complexity and the nuance between good and evil that exists in the film Truth and Treason. I think the title itself kind of opens that door to what the experience is going to be. I had the gift back in 2001 of meeting Karl-Heinz Schnibe, who, when you see the film, you realize he's one of Helmut's two best friends, and he's part of this resistance group. I met the real guy, and we became dear friends. And so he opened up this door for me of really understanding what it was like in Nazi Germany, because I think it's easy to look back, 80 something years and see it kind of in black and white. You got the heroic resistance fighters and the evil Gestapo or the evil Nazis, when in reality, there was this big gray area in the. That's where most Germans lived out their lives. And Karl, for me, was a real entree into understanding that, getting this firsthand experience of growing up surrounded by propaganda. Just access to the truth was so limited, so that when Helmut did hear the truth, it was just so clear to him. He just immediately recognized it. And then delving into, the character that Rupert portrays, Erwin Mussner, this, again, based on a real person, this Gestapo agent, Erwin Mussner, who was hunting down whoever was putting out these treasonous leaflets from his perspective, and would do horrible things to people during the day. But we have evidence that at night he went home and he was a loving and kind husband and father. And at first that was hard for me to get my head around, But then, the more I explored into it, I realized that that was life in Nazi Germany, and it was complex, and it was, it was this gray area. So I'm as a history buff, but also as a filmmaker and storyteller, I'm just really attracted to the reality of that kind of complexity in a story and in the characters. And it was important from the get-go in writing the script with my writing partner, Ethan Vincent, that that's the kind of story that we wanted to tell.
Well, you tell it beautifully, man. You really do. And I feel like on a second viewing, again, there's always layers to a story, right? It's never about any one thing, it seems to me, right? There's so much more going on. I love that phrase. There's so much more going on than meets the eye. Rupert, there's a scene in the film, and I can't remember if it's when you're questioning Helmut or if it's where you're talking with your wife about your professor. I think that was the scene where you said you were learning lessons about
the technology,
loyalty and how to be a good man and so on. Was that for you, maybe as a character, as an actor, a bit of a turning point in the film and with Erwin's character? And I think if that's the question, I want to ask, is it possible in the moment that was happening with Nazi interrogators and so on, that they would go, what are we doing here? Like, how can this be right? And yet they moved forward anyway. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a pretty big question.
It does. And I think Matt and I and the other actors, we talked about this a lot, about trying to understand, what it would be like to live in this, with this regime, in this world, the realities. I just also want to say to your listeners as well, that this is a true story.
Right.
And I think this is one of the things, if you're going to go and watch one movie that if you have time, please go. This is the movie to watch, because it really is a true story. And Matt found this extraordinary story and made a documentary about it over 20 years ago. And it's taken him and Ethan and others to, get to a point where we've, made a movie. And I think it's such an extraordinary, heroic story, and the fact that it's true, and the fact that it really has come out at a time when, when the world feels a little more unsafe than I think that's fair to say, that we all feel a bit, it's troubling times right now. So it's a very special film, I think. And I think for me, particularly when doing this film, I really did, like you say, David, what was it like living in this world? And I think a lot of people just had, I think some people chose to just survive, and try and get through the day, and not be questioned, not be caught, and be home. And I think fear and a sense of always being watched, I think for a lot of people living day to day in Nazi Germany, that I suspect that's how they must have felt. And for my character, again, he has a very loving home. He has a wife and kids. And the status that he has, he's only, he's a senior police officer. He's not, in the higher echelons of the Nazi government or anything like that. He's in charge of what they call a precinct of Hamburg. So he's a senior policeman, but he's not, in any way sort of high up in politics. So he is someone who's, day to day, but, the trappings and the he has being the person he is in terms of, his pay and what it allows him, his family to do. I think that is, something that he focuses on and justifies it to himself, really. But I think there must be times, and particularly in that scene, which is one of my favorite scenes, Dave. It's interesting you pointed out. It was an extraordinary writing. It's a kind of a monologue about his past, really. And I think he's talking to his wife, and for the first time trying to communicate to his wife, saying, I'm having doubts, questioning everything, but he can't quite say it. So he sort of, as we do with our own relationships, I'm sure, the subtext is something very different to what is being said. And his wife understands that. And, it's a wonderful scene that Matt and Ethan wrote.
Well, Rupert, I'm so glad you said that, because the thing that so much about that scene that stood out for me, and Matt, beautifully written, beautifully directed, and so on.
One of my favorite scenes. I can't believe that you mentioned it. Honestly,
that's
most
awesome.
People mention violence. There's quite a lot of torture scenes for those listeners who haven't seen the movie yet. Truth and Treason, it's quite a lot, particularly the back end of the film. There's quite a lot of torture. It's kind of hard watching, but there are some great moments of stillness as well, and that's one scene.
It's one that's so beautiful. And Matt, did you really have to go for the fingernails? I mean, really? That's for me. It goes to a whole other, other level at that point.
It's
really,
based on
really does.
Based on research that we did, and it was important to me. We see other kinds of violence, in the film, but this was very intimate. I mean, again, without too many spoilers, but the fingernail scene, as we call it, begins with him gently laying his hand on Helmut's hand, before all of a sudden
it's so beautiful.
Gets much, much worse. But it was it's the kind of torture, or the kind of where their faces are so close, and the really complex relationship that's already developed between the quote unquote hardened Gestapo agent and this young resistance fighter, that it comes to a head in a really, really hard way, And so it was important to me that it be that kind of violence, if you will.
Yeah. I think violence should be in your face. I think it, if we're going to watch it on film and see it in a story, I think we should recoil and to some degree at least turn away and say, really, what was it that bad? And I think that's a fair place to take us, I think, as a storyteller. Rupert and Matt, both the writer, actor in this scene. So let's go back to that scene. And I think your wife says to you something, do you wish you'd never known? And I just went, okay, there's a whole layer to this story, right? Let's just sweep everything under the carpet. It's going to be a whole lot better that way, right? Like, don't challenge me with the truth. Don't tell me the truth. That's just going to be too hard to manage. And am I on the right path there with that?
I'll chime in first here, Rupert. And
yeah, go.
In writing that scene, it really was all about the subtext. He's talking about this, an old girlfriend and an old professor, and those are the words that he's saying, but they both know. And this was something even in Nazi Germany, even between family members, they had to be careful often. They had to speak in code, because you never knew who was going to overhear it, who was going to turn you in. And so even here where we have this, a man and wife, a husband and wife sitting, in the privacy of their own home, but even then being careful. And, when she asks him, do you wish you'd never known? And he says the truth, and she can only nod her head. They're saying, do we wish that we hadn't discovered that we have been, we've been supporting the wrong, we've been on the wrong side of history, and now it has confronted us. But they can't say any of that. They have to couch it. That was a scene. I gotta say, that's a scene that early drafts of that I wrote with Ethan 15 years ago or longer, and it became something. That it was. And then to be on set that day, Rupert, and to see two incredible actors just make that what it was, that's the most gratifying thing that you can imagine, as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, just to have a scene that's like, oh my goodness, it worked better than I ever thought that it would. It's such a powerful and poignant scene.
And I love it, David, because I'm so glad you picked up on that, because for me, these movies, it's got some action, it's got some torture, but actually for me, it's about the humanity of it. And it's this couple. And we've all been there, haven't we? We all, I'm sure in our own relationships, past and present, where, confronting things, being honest about something, about, the past, or, well, it's sometimes hard. And, for Erwin, he can't go there. If he goes there, I don't know what he would do. He would sort of, I don't know, he can't, there's only so far he can go in actually confronting the horror of what he does and being honest with his wife and telling her the truth about what he does at work on a daily basis. And he justifies it by saying, to himself, he says, I'm doing it for you, I'm doing it. But, I think he really struggles with that. And I think this is the closest they come to having a really honest discussion about what each of them feels about being a Nazi, about the ideals and the ideology behind it, and has it been a mistake? And now they're questioning it. It's an extraordinary scene, and it's an extraordinary film.
It really is. It just makes me realize the fine lines. When people want to put things into sort of the good category or the bad category, and it's very helpful. I've studied philosophy most of my life, and I really push back against that kind of dualism. Everything comes with footnotes, doesn't it? It's all, or at least largely to me, paradox and contradiction. And I think you bring that out really well in that scene, and it's so beautiful. Again, I'm going to focus on that, but it comes out in other ways too. I feel like your character in this film, Rupert, that you were close to potentially being one of the resistance fighters as well. Like, I felt that. And I don't know if that's what you were going for or not, Matt. And I don't know if that's what was really going through the man's mind, 75 years ago. But I think a lot of us are there.
I don't know if that was, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I think, he thought, I think, my character, he's someone who thinks he's in a position of strength and, power, but he realizes that actually, he's not, he's actually conformed. And actually, these boys have made they've made a choice to not conform. That's really the bravest thing. And he realizes that he's not brave. And I think when we have children as well, I think that changes us, doesn't it? All of us, of those of us who have kids, are lucky enough to have kids. I think you, for me anyway, you question everything and how you want to bring your children up, what you want them to believe. And I think he suddenly sees these four boys, and particularly, obviously, Helmut, realizes that he's not the person he thought he was, my character anyway. And that's that he battles with.
And if I can add something here, David, what we call the smoking scene, this is the scene that we're talking about between Rupert and Anne, his wife. There's a companion.
The smoking scene? Oh my God, I didn't know that. I think that's what
as we were writing it, yeah, we called it the smoking scene. But
you were calling it this one, right.
Yeah, but there's a companion moment later. It's at we've already been talking about the fingernail scene. At the very end of that scene, after the violence, there's this really quiet moment where Erwin says some final words to Helmut. And I remember on the day, Rupert, as we were doing that, one of the things that I think we discussed was those words that you are seemingly saying to Helmut, you're saying them to yourself. And it becomes this really introspective moment that harkens back to the same conversation that he had with his wife. And so on your second viewing, David, when you watch the end of the fingernail scene and what, what Erwin is saying to Helmut, he's talking to himself. Everything he says is to himself. And it gives, I think, again, there's the subtext that's just through that. Every scene we tried to imbue with, it's really not about what they're saying out loud to each other. It's all the subtext that's going on underneath that.
Yeah, it's good. It's so interesting to me that you're one of the other, like if I was to say, Matt, hey, what's this film really about? I would think I would hope I would get a pretty long list, bullet pointed list of all the different sort of thematic elements. Cause I've just seen it a few hours ago. I take notes. We're having this conversation now. I'll reflect, but it's so layered to me. And I think one of the things about the conviction of both Helmut and Rupert, you're both convicted. right? You're both passionately committed to the cause, small c or capital C. And you just say, how is it? Where is that line? You know? And I want to say out loud here right now, this young man, Helmut, was 16 when he was starting to, to type these messages out on the typewriter. This is mind-boggling to me that such a young man would be that committed to the cause that he was willing to, as you let us know at the beginning of the film, take the plunge.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, David. You've hit the nail on the head. From my character, I cannot get over the fact that this is a boy who's 17, who is able, who has, who's standing up and who's committed to this. I cannot fathom that, and I cannot get it out of my head as a character. I have admiration. I am, as a character. I mean, the court scene. I'll never forget it.
It's super powerful, Rupert.
I really hate him because I could never be that sort of noble. I could never be that sort of, honest and true to myself. And I think, that's you're absolutely right. It blew my mind as the character that when we catch him eventually, he's only 17.
And how does a young man like that ideologically come out of a family that clearly was supporting the Nazi Party and socialists before that? Where does that come from? And Matt, you wrote such a beautiful line. I think it's, if I could help me out here, but I think the line is, I found it in my typewriter. Come on. Like, that's fantastic, right? There's just so much going on there just in that one line. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, when he's recruiting his two buddies to join him in his resistance efforts, and he shows them a leaflet, and they ask, "Where did you get this?" "Oh, I found it." And then they look at it, like, "Wait a minute, where'd you find it?" "Yes," and his response, "In my typewriter." Again, there's so much subtext underneath when he says that, and it's to your point that how did Helmut, this 16-year-old kid, see what he saw? It's interesting because when I was doing the documentary, in 2002, we went over and interviewed Günter Grass, the German, Nobel laureate German writer who was the exact same age as Helmut, raised in Nazi Germany. And when we talked to, he had written about Helmut in one of his books, and so we were asking him about that and why he would. And Günter Grass asked that same question. He said, "How did he see it and I didn't? We were the same age. How did Helmut see what he saw, and not only see it, but then act on it? How did he do that when I didn't?" And that question, coming from someone like Günter Grass, has always stuck with me as well. And I don't know that we have an answer on how did Helmut see that. We know he was a really bright, insightful kid. We know that he was curious. But somehow he saw things at a time this is 1941 when Hitler, the Nazis were dominating. They were invading countries and winning on every front. And here's this kid who is writing leaflets that says, we're going to lose, and we're going to lose bad, and here's how we're going to lose. And he spells it out, and he was right on every single point. And it's just, again, just looking back at that from a historical perspective, it's hard to get our head around. It's incredible.
It's really hard to get your head around. I had the pleasure of interviewing August Diel, I believe, the German actor from A Hidden Life, Terrence Malick's film. And there's a moment, Matt, you just took me back. It's a beautiful film, a huge Malick fan. But there's a scene where I think everyone else raises their hand in the salute, and he doesn't. It's just this little simple act of defiance and pushback. And you know that something like this must be coming. But again, where does Rupert, you talked about it in the courtroom. The courtroom scene is brilliant. Here we got this 16-year-old correcting the judge on misquoting Aristotle. I thought it was fantastic. It's just, but again, where does that bravery, where does that courage, where does that passion come from? It's something I think we do need to be talking about more. And, people say you can't talk about sex and politics and money and religion. I actually think they're the only things we should be talking about. Everything else doesn't matter.
I want to go to a party with you.
Funny. Yeah, I'm probably the guy in the corner. Yeah, on my own. I won't be on the dance floor, Matt. I won't be on the dance. I'll be on a different kind of dance floor, I think. Yeah, so Matt, in your research, did you ever feel, I don't know, did you ever feel like that you were actually walking in the shoes of this young man? or did you look up to him in the sense of, wow, I hope I would have behaved the same way? Like, was there that kind of empathy for you as a writer? And for you too, this question, Rupert, as an actor as well, I would imagine you have to go there from time to time.
Yeah, I'll tell you, since from the very day that Karl Heinz-Schnibe first shared his story with me, I've been asking myself that question, what would I have done? Would I have done what Helmut did? You know what, if I'm honest, I don't think that I would have. For one reason, if I have a wife and kids, they knew that if they did something, and not only they would get arrested and interrogated and possibly tortured and sent to a camp, their whole family and their whole community was in danger. And so would I have done that? Again, probably not. But I can also, the companion question for me is, well, what will I do now? And that is maybe a better question for me, because how can I, I'm not living in Nazi Germany. But where do I need to stand up? That's one of you mentioned, bigger themes of the film. One of them is stand up, and who's gonna. Helmut gets challenged early on from the second scene in the film when that Hitler youth leader gives him the opportunity to defend himself, and he's not there yet. And his stepfather, who literally yells at him, "Stand up!" And he can't. And so, when he does in the courtroom, when he literally has the opportunity to betray his friend and throw his friend under the bus, so to speak, and instead he stands up. That's where I ask myself, okay, well, where can I stand up? In my life, what are the ways that I can stand up? And every major character in this film has that opportunity, including Erwin Musner, including Rupert's character. And, again, without giving away too many spoilers, and this is based on historical fact, even the Gestapo agent had the decision, am I going to stand up here? And tries to.
For me right now in the world, I think one of the greatest things that we're missing out on is compassion. I'm not sure where it's gone. And I know though that that's happening in communities and in families and so on and so forth around the world. And there's lots of beautiful things going on, but you don't have to go too far in the news to realize that it seems like we're living in a very compassionate world. And did that cross your mind, Rupert, with this character? Because I think you really do play the if I can polarize it here for a second, the good and the evil. Like you give me hope in the sense that maybe just one more conversation with this guy could have changed everything.
Yeah, David, it's interesting. I mean, for your listeners on Face to Face, I'll be honest with you. I found this part, and I continue to find it when I talk about it, very emotional for me, deeply emotional. And I sometimes struggle doing these interviews because I can I go right back straight away to a place where I was. And I found it looking back. What do I look back on? My character, when he comes across this boy and he realizes, it was this boy that had done these anti-Hitler leaflets, who had spent and risked everything going around Hamburg in the middle of the night during air raids, during curfews, putting all these leaflets out and risking everything. I think for my character, I found it very difficult because I was angry that he did it, and he had he risked it, and he had something that I didn't have as the character, as a person, and he had a nobility and a truth that I felt a fraud as a character. I really did, and I struggled with that. And it was interesting during the filming, David, I really couldn't be, I couldn't really spend too much time with the boys, with the four guys, if I'm honest with you. I found it very difficult. And not because they're not nice people, but just because I think my character, he is challenged by Helmut in a way that he has never been challenged before. And I think, not to give too much away, I always hesitate, Matt. I never know how much, but because I lose something in my life that's so fundamental to me that I think I question everything, and then I have nothing left. And suddenly I'm sort of angry that this boy has I sort of blame him in a weird way. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling here, and your listeners will be going, what the hell is this guy talking about? But, it's a very difficult, it's kind of extraordinary journey for me. And so, yeah, I can't even remember what your question was.
You know what, Rupert? I don't know if I can either, but what's most important about it is you're being authentic.
Well,
I don't know, Matt, if that's where you were going with this, but
and it's interesting what Matt said, because I'm not sure that I too would be as strong as him and be able to stand up. I'm not sure I would. And
and I don't know if any of us
myself.
would, right? We can get up at a whiteboard and lay out why we think we would behave in a particular way, but until we're in the moment. And I think, doesn't Helmut also say, Matt, help me out here, near the beginning of the film, after the church scene, the hymn, could you have picked a better hymn? Do the right thing? Like, come on. It was right. And I urge my listeners, you need to look up this hymn. You need to read the lyrics, and then you need to go back and watch the scene again and talk to me about contradiction and the layers and so on. But he says afterwards, well, we can't do anything about it. And Helmut says, we do what we can. So Matt, your question about what can I do now is what's most important for all of us. And I know we got to wrap up here in a couple of minutes, and I knew we weren't going to have enough time for this conversation, but maybe there's a part 2 in our future. But
I hope so.
Isn't that what it is, Matt? It's about today. It's about now. What can we do in the face of the lack of compassion in the world, the anger, the hatred, the fake news, the so on and so on? Can you kind of wrap us up there on that, Matt, maybe?
Yeah, I think that the central question of the film is encapsulated in another very quiet little scene that I love. It's right after, it's a scene between Helmut and another member of his congregation. His bishop is a devout member of his faith, but also a devout Nazi. And when Helmut sees these things coming into conflict, he doesn't know what to do. And there's this little conversation where he asks another member of his congregation, what do we do? And that man's response is, we do what we can. And I think that really comes to the heart of it. It's within this story, but I hope for all of us, not all of us are going to be in a position to make worldwide change or anything like that, but we can do what we can. We can speak truth to power in our circle of influence. And sometimes that's really hard, even with people that we know and love, to be able to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. I mean, for teenagers to see this, and if they come away going, you know what, there's that kid at school that gets bullied, and I always see it, and I always wish I said something, and you know what, now I am going to, that I get chills just thinking about that, but that's just one very specific example. But I think we all can find those in our lives where we just say, what can I do? Because at the end of the day, all we can do is what we can do.
And staying present. Yeah, for sure. I take that from this film as well. Being present, being in the moment. And I mean, I've been, as a philosopher, been struggling with the problem of evil all my life. And people tell me, you know what, you just got to let it go. You just got to you have to land. No, I don't agree. We need better language around it. And I think in the moment, I mean, a lot of people say you just got to resist evil, but I think that's true. That also presupposes we know exactly what it is. So, which is precisely why I do what I do here on Face to Face and have these conversations. And I want to thank you both. And I always smile when I finally hit stop recording. And I just think, what? We started 35 minutes ago. It feels like we just hit record 5 minutes ago. What is going? This is fantastic. So I love that we've been able to go some pretty amazing places. And Rupert, thanks for your authenticity and your candor. I really love that. I felt like in that one scene you were channeling a little bit of Alan Rickman from Die Hard. It reminded
wow, gosh,
seriously,
yes. Great Alan Rickman, who's here with us now. But
exactly, but didn't he dance that good right in that film? Wasn't it brilliant? Just so beautiful.
Absolutely.
That was his first film.
Yeah, I say thank you for having it. Thank you for having us on Face to Face. It's been great.
Thank you.
Really, brilliant.
You're welcome. The film is Truth and Treason, and I'm going to let my listeners know where they can find more information about that. And I really do, honestly, guys, look forward to chatting with you both again down the road. And thanks for this film. Everyone, you need to see it. Check it out. You've been listening here to Face with Matt Whitaker and Rupert Evans.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.